if I were to just start apologizing for the things that we did wrong 10 years ago, the show would never end.
G4 was really one of the very last cable channels ever launched. It was the end of this linear cable era before we got to streaming and whatever it is we watch now.
Something unique, something different, something a little meta, something that was turn the mirror back onto pop culture and kind of spit in its face, but then wipe it off and give you a kiss at the same time.
He was a TV host who was also a production assistant on another show.
Oh, nice molester stash.
You do know who that is, right?
It's Shia LaBeouf, Transformer Kid.
No, it's you.
Friend sent me a series of VHS resume tapes. There was no one better than Whitney Cummings until Olivia Munn came on set.
Hello, Governor. I am Olivia Munn.
She delivered amazingly.
We dumped a bunch of snakes on her. Wow.
Was Olivia wearing the slave Leia at Comic-Con?
History in the making.
The floodgates that they were open.
Fans were losing their minds.
We were being hounded.
It was also kind of subversive 4chan dark comedy.
We did stuff that would not fly.
Go for power, girl. You're a whore. Also, more susceptible to getting AIDS.
And then from there, the wheels were off the bus.
You got another light bulb, right? Bill, check out.
And it's on fire.
The world has been waiting for a half Chinese, half American girl diving into a giant chocolate-filled cream pie.
I want knee jump.
Right before we went live, Kevin had just shown me 2 Girls, 1 Cup.
Sex with dragons is one of God's special mysteries.
I spent 8 years researching space dragon sex.
Mannequin. Not all of those things that happen on the show
I don't swallow with Kevin.
would be acceptable by today's standards.
The infamous fat suit gag, one of our production management was gonna walk.
I did a lot of on-camera drinking. Try a beer from every single.
2.7. You should be dead.
People will look at a broadcast back then and think, ooh.
Oh my.
Yeah.
You can't do that anymore.
Man, we did it once, but now no more. You can't do that no more.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, we are so happy to have with us a threat to all cinema, Mr. Film Threat himself, Chris Gore. Say hello to everybody.
William, thanks for having me on the show.
No
Film
problem.
snob sounds like my kind of rag. I love it.
Oh, dude, it's the best site on the internet. Seriously, like all we do is talk crap about movies and film, and that's what we love. You know, we loved nerdy stuff, much like Attack of the Show, which is what your movie Attack of the Docs is about. The legendary, and I call it legendary because growing up, I watched it every single day. Legendary daily show from G4, Attack of the Show. Tell us about this doc and why you made it.
Well, a couple things. One, I was like you. I was a fan of the G4 TV network. I used to watch the screensavers every day. I watched X Play. I couldn't believe that an entire network existed to talk about nerdy stuff. I loved it, couldn't believe it. And out of the blue, I get this call from Gavin Purcell, who's the executive producer of the show, who offered me an opportunity to do the DV Tuesday segment. But he said that the name of the show, The Screensavers, was going to be changed to Attack of the Show. And I thought it was the dumbest name I had ever heard. What is this, Attack of the Clones? Ridiculous. That's lame. And then, of course, I think that name grew on everybody. I mean, for me, the reason to make it was that having been on the show, I was on the, like I said, Screensavers, then I was on every week, sometimes a couple times a week, and I was like a backup host on Attack of the Show. Like, I was on the show from the beginning until the very end, when the show went off the network, or when the network ended in like 2013, early 2013. And it was my best experience in television. I was around nerdy people who were as passionate about comic books, movies, video games, tech, as I was, super passionate. It was like everyone who worked on the show was also a nerd in some form, and they loved it. So, I wanted to tell the story of what happened, because I would go to a convention. I'm still going to Comic-Cons. I was going to Comic-Cons when I was a kid, still go to WonderCon, LA Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con. I go to those every year. The big question I was always get, whatever happened to G4 TV and Attack of the Show? And I thought to myself, someone has to make a documentary about this. Someone should do it. maybe it should just be me. You know, I had sort of one foot in because I was on the show, but I also was a fan of the show. I would watch everything but myself. So the name popped into my head, Attack of the Doc. So I registered attackofthedoc.com. I got the social media handles Attack of the Doc and said, one day I'm going to make this movie. I launched an unsuccessful Kickstarter, then eventually a successful one. And then we started shooting in March of 2020. And it kind of changed how we were going to make the movie because the pandemic happened. So we had to shift it. But it really came from a passion of that story had never really been told. And I think that when G4 ended, it was like, it was very abrupt. It just ended without like any kind of closure. You know, both Olivia and then Kevin eventually left, and then the network just kind of faded away, and then the plug was pulled. But it didn't have like a series finale. You know, like series finale is such a big thing in television these days. I mean, if there's a series finale of something, it's a big deal. It's the last episode. You're going to pull out all the stops. You're going to have everyone who's ever been on the show have their, day in the spotlight. And Attack of the Show never got to have that. It never got to have its quote final episode. It had a final episode, but not like a end of the show kind of thing. So what I'm hoping to do through this documentary is remind people like a different era of time, why Attack of the Show was so popular, why it resonated with fans. It was made by fans who were nerdy about everything. So, I hope that comes across as a love letter to not just G4 and Attack of the Show, but also that era.
I love that because people don't understand mid 2000s TV was the Wild West. I
yes.
mean, for the gaming nerds, you had G4. For us film nerds, you had Reels Channel, which used to actually show movies or TV shows about movies and not just show old 80s movies all day like it does now. It was the Wild West. And I'm glad that you took all the cowboys, lined them up and put them in this documentary. And I think that's the best way I could probably tell you to put that. Now, you yourself are a huge film nerd, tech guy. You love all that stuff. I have to ask you then, what is, I ask all my guests this question, if you were stuck with only 2 films for the rest of your life to watch, what 2 would they be and why?
Well, the first one would be 2001: A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick. I watched that movie at least once a month. I have the 4K version. It is a film that blew my mind when I was a kid. And let me tell you why. When I was a little kid, single digit age, 3 or 4 years old, was a time when you would gather the family, because I'm Gen X, I'm a little older. Okay.
Yeah.
And when movies played on television, it was an event. Gone with the Wind, West Side Story, just Wizard of Oz. It was a big deal. And I remember seeing those movies as a kid, and my family always thought this was funny. I hated those movies. I thought, this movie isn't real. I wanted the story to be real, like it was real in real life. No one ever went to the bathroom in The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind. When did they go to the bathroom? These people aren't real. They're fake. Well, my dad, oddly enough, when I was 5 years old, took me to a retrospective screening of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. It had already been out and released whenever, this is years after it was released. And I went to see the movie, and in the movie, one of the characters goes to the bathroom. And it freaked me out because I'm like, oh my God, this movie's real. People are going to the bathroom in the movie. And then even years later, Stanley Kubrick had a scene in Eyes Wide Shut where Nicole Kidman sits down to tinkle.
Yeah.
And goes to the bathroom right in front of Tom Cruise's character. And then I found out later, this is the internet. It's, what's that rule of the internet where it's just like, if there's a websites that make lists of scenes in movies where people go to the bathroom. And I can answer a question. I didn't know we were going to go down this rabbit hole. Tell me, if you can, the name of the actor who has gone to the bathroom more in a movie than any other actor, a very famous actor.
I don't even know. Jim Carrey?
Tom Hanks.
That's weird.
Tom Hanks in Castaway, he goes to the bathroom on the plane. It's a plot point in The Green Mile. Remember, he has a urinary tract infection. In Forrest Gump, he says, "I gotta pee." It's in other Tom Hanks movies. If you want to cast Tom Hanks in your movie, just write a scene where he goes to pee. Anyways, back to your Desert Island 2 movies thing. That movie blew my mind when I was a kid, because it was the first movie I recognized where someone went to the bathroom. I was a little kid, and it kind of freaked me out. And it's always been this movie I go back to, because 2001: A Space Odyssey is an enigma. It's a movie that I thought every time, it's sort of every era when I see it, I think differently about it. It is like a Rorschach test. So I love that film, because for me, it hits differently depending on when I've seen it. And then I would probably put in there something like, Slacker by Richard Linklater, which is one of my favorite. I mean, this is an impossible question for me, but the Slacker, directed by Richard Linklater, his second feature film, which is shot in Austin, Texas, is my favorite independent film of all time. It's sort of there is sort of this through line of, it's like a collection of short films, day in the life of experiences of people in Austin, Texas. It's a beautiful film. It made me love Richard Linklater as a filmmaker. I just think that he is wildly talented. His movie that's on Netflix right now, Apollo 10.5, is an animated film. Brilliant. It's so good. So good. I've just always been a fan of him because he doesn't do the normal thing, right? But it probably, God, you'd say like only two? What about David Lynch, Blue Velvet, Eraserhead?
I mean, Mulholland Drive.
Mulholland Drive. I could go on and on, like Desert Island. I need 100. But if two, those would probably be the two, because I could watch those over and over again and be incredibly entertained.
Listen, Michael Shannon got 2, you get 2.
Okay, good. All right, that's all I got is 2.
Them's the rules. 2.
All right, I'll take it.
Now, it's funny because you mentioned that, and especially mentioned Linklater. I'm a huge Linklater fan. The opening scene for Slacker is one of my favorite opening scenes in any independent film. The taxi scene.
Yes.
It's just crazy. Yes.
It's so beautiful. And then it ends with they're making a movie. They have like Super 8 film that they're shooting, and it kind of cuts to that footage. Like, I just think now I'm going to watch it today because we're having this conversation. Like, I can't not see it. Later today, I'm watching Slacker. But it was really influential to me. I was fortunate. Actually, Richard Linklater has mentioned this story. It's weird. He didn't know what he was going to do, like, to sell the movie. He eventually sold it to like Sony Pictures Classics, but he didn't know. He said he would probably buy ads in Film Threat and just sell VHS tapes. But he sent me an early VHS cut of a cut of the film on VHS that was like 2 hours long. Eventually, the release version is just over 90 minutes. But I got to see this really, really early cut of it. And it just sat in a pile of tapes. Like, we would have filmmakers just send us movies, and, oh, who's this guy, Richard Link? I didn't know who he was. He wasn't Richard Linklater yet, but my God, that movie really influenced me. And it became one of those things that, like, you got to watch this tape. We'd pass it around the office, and eventually I got to meet Richard Linklater. I've interviewed him many times for Film Threat when it was a print magazine. And he's someone that I've always admired and respected in the industry.
I'm a huge fan of Richard Linklater, so I love that you mentioned that. I love that you mentioned his new rotoscoped film.
Yeah.
He's very good with the rotoscope. Love it.
Love it.
Now, obviously, you've had a long career talking about movies. Can you talk about how different it was making one?
Yeah, well, this is not my first film. I made a 16mm feature in college called Cool Teenager from the Planet X. I made a short film that ended up selling on called Red. It's about the Tube Bar tapes, starring Lawrence Tierney, shot in black and white. And then I co-wrote and produced a feature called My Big Fat Independent Movie. I've been involved as a producer, helping other friends make films. This is the first film that I'm credited as director of a documentary. So it's my first documentary director credit. And it is somewhat personal, but it's not my story. And look, I, know what it's like to get behind the camera and also be in front of the camera. The person I will say that, like, really, really inspired me to start being more serious about making movies was Rod Lurie. I don't know if you know who Rod Lurie is. Rod Lurie is a filmmaker.
Yeah.
He's made a bunch of movies. The Candidate was one, with Jeff Bridges, a whole bunch of others. But I knew Rod Lurie back in the 90s. Rod Lurie was a film critic. I can quote one of his reviews. Rod Lurie reviewed Batman Returns when it came out.
Oh God.
And he said that Danny DeVito's character looked like a pair of shaved testicles. And that was a quote. I never forgot that. And I remember, hanging out with Rod Lurie. He had made his first feature film, and this was like the late 90s, early 2000s. And I saw Rod at some like Meet the Directors thing. And I was covering movies at the time for Film Threat. And we had this great conversation. He said, in no other industry do journalists, like in all these other industries, if you cover sports, right, you're not sitting there going like, well, if I was LeBron James, I would have done this, or in politics, if you're covering politics, well, if I was president, I would be doing this. And a lot of people in journalism are like, well, if I was the director, I would have done this. And the thing is this, that way of crossing over from talking and writing about film to then making films is the pathway of so many people. The French New Wave, Jean-Luc Godard, Francois Truffaut, Kim Morgan. Kim Morgan is the wife of Guillermo del Toro. She was a film critic before she wrote movies. Kim Morgan, in her own right, is now a film. If you write a movie, direct a movie, produce a movie, you are a filmmaker. So many people cross over because when you're a critic of film, you pay attention to details. This is too slow. This movie should be under this running time. We got to cut that. You got to kill your babies. Like, I think that even more when you look at critics who have crossed over to making film, they are even more critical than a person, because what the critics are going to say. And I'm braced for look, movie's not going to be 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. I hope it's got a high audience score. And I hope people like the film, or at least think it's worth checking out or renting it for $2.99. But I know how film critics think. So under the circumstances, with the money we had and the resources, made the best film I possibly could. I believe it delivers on a lot of levels, but whatever criticisms come my way from the critics, I'll take it. And circling back to Richard Linklater, I had a conversation with Richard about reviews. What does he think about reviews? We had this whole conversation. It's in Film Threat magazine, back when it was a print magazine in the 90s. He had the most interesting take. He said, after a while, the positive reviews are the same, because critics tend to just echo the same comments as other critics. The cinematography was great. Ben Affleck was a standout in Dazed and Confused, whatever it is. He said he prefers to read negative reviews, because it's the only opportunity to learn something. You learn something from a negative review of like, oh, okay. Sometimes the negative review comes from a personal place, like the critic has like something that's more about them than actually about the movie. But other times there is very astute criticism, not like, I loved it, I hated it, or vice versa, whatever. Like, that's too simple. That sort of analog thumbs up, thumbs down that's too simple-minded. And I love talking about movies. I always have. To me, movies are a gateway to a conversation about anything: life, love, romance, loss of a loved one, death, tragedy, healing. You could talk about anything and somehow it's related to film. But yeah, that was really interesting that Richard Linklater said that. So I'm bracing for all the negative reviews. I hope to learn something on the next movie I make, which I've been working on for 10 years, which is a documentary about film threat in the 90s, also a period doc, and it's called Film Threat Sucks. So we're going to be submitting. Yeah, we're going to be submitting to film festivals, and so hopefully people will get to see it in about a year.
Love that. So, if you need, opinions on Film Threat, we've been reading since we were knee high to a grasshopper.
Oh, that's
so
great.
We're familiar with your work. And so when we
Thank
had the opportunity to talk to you about this, we were like, oh, we're talking to a guy who we've read before, who is talking about a subject that we know quite intimately, and that's G4. How do you feel about that, by the way, it being back?
Well, first of all, I was ecstatic that the network was going to come back. I was so excited. Then I thought, well, how does this affect the doc? And then I thought, oh, there's more than likely they're going to do a reunion. The climax of the doc is the reunion at G4 TV and the successful launch of the network. But that didn't happen.
No.
So they ended up doing a reunion. I was initially invited to participate, but because of COVID restrictions, I was told that they had to keep it to a tight crew. And like, this was at the time when, everyone was masking, you remember, and they did this G4 reunion special. I think it was, what was it? Was it 2021 or was it? No, 2020. November 2020, I think, is when their reunion special was. And, I think they did the best they could with that. When the network relaunched, it was like, as expected, like a like Star Trek, The Next Generation. It's an all new crew. So, and I think that they were taking it from a different standpoint. The thing is that, people forget G4 TV launched on April 24th, 2002. Was the launch of the original G4 TV. And it took about 5 years for G4 to get good. I mean, there were good shows, X-Play, Screensavers, but it really didn't become mainstream popular for about 5 years. It was 2007. I couldn't believe it. It was like, I was going to conventions, I'm being recognized and people want to take selfies with me. I mean, who the heck am I, right? Like, I'm the movie guy, right? But it was like full on, like, oh, this is a phenomenon. But the new G4 TV did not get the opportunity to make mistakes, the opportunity to correct those mistakes and pivot and to grow an audience. And it's unfortunate, it's sad for me to see. Although I did joke, I said they should invite all the old G4 legacy people on once an episode and kill them off, just like the Star Wars sequels. Every Star Wars sequel, they just killed off Han, then Luke, then Leia. I mean, I don't know, maybe that could have worked, although they did kill me on the show several times in certain, I don't know, maybe that says something. Oh my God, I was like murdered on Attack of the Show many times.
Yes.
I don't know why
they're in the movie.
Many times. That was a recurring thing. But what, look, the new G4 just didn't get the opportunity. I mean, hardly anything. I wish it had the chance. But my purpose in doing the doc is to leave a legacy of the old G4 TV and why I think it's culturally significant, why it's a milestone in pop culture, and kind of remind people of, like, this is why the show was popular. The people, the chemistry between Kevin and Olivia, which is just palpable, that it was made by fans for fans, just as the movie is also made by fans for fans. Like, look, like, yeah, I'm the director. I came up with the vision for it. I did all the interviews and whatnot. But Bobby Schwartz, who co-produced with me and edited the doc, he was watching G4 TV when he was like a junior high. Okay. He was a kid watching, and then suddenly he grows up. We meet randomly at a bar in Hollywood, become fast friends, and Bobby Schwartz and I are making this movie together, along with like Walter Areas and Anthony Ray Bench, Glenn Brown, Phil Eubanks, like all the people who worked on the documentary, so many, Josiah Teal, like they were all fans of the show when they were kids, and now they're just making the movie with me. It was amazing. And it really, like, to pull off, first of all, archival doc is one of the most expensive kind of, and time-consuming type of documentaries to make. So the fact that we did it with such a skeleton crew, and all of us worked part-time because we all have jobs. We didn't pay ourselves. We did not pay ourselves money to work on the doc. We just were like, well, we all have to have jobs and we'll work on it on the side, which is why it took over 3 years. So not to mention the pandemic and G4 returning, which changed things. But, you know, I just hope that that love comes across and that people are reminded, because I really think that the new G4 wasn't given the chance. Sure, they made mistakes. Did the old G4 make mistakes? Yes, a lot, many, many more. It's just that no one remembers them, you know, because they remember the G4 that was when G4 got popular, which was, you know, right around like 2005, 2006. It was like, oh, this is becoming popular, but it took that long.
It did, and it's right around when I graduated high school, so it was the perfect time for me to, you know, catch on to it. And you can tell there's a love for that particular channel in your doc. So we only have one last question. So we wanted to ask, are your jeans okay?
My jeans are okay. Obviously, you saw in the doc, and it's in the trailer too, where I fell. And by the way, I had a mic pack, which are thick. These mic packs, they're like this. In my back pocket, I had my phone in my back pocket, and because they were kind of tight, the jeans were already tight, but I put that in there. I just lost my footing under my legs, smashed down, and my first thought was, don't swear, you're on TV. And I just popped into my head, ow, because it hurt. Ow, my jeans. And I looked like an idiot.
God.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, but that I think it's a GIF on Twitter. That's there. But no, I just want to tell, you know, that's like a funny story. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff that you'll see in the documentary, it's everyone who worked on the show back in the day all had a sense of humor about themselves. And I really hope that comes across, and that it reminds fans of like, well, why was G4 so popular? And this movie will remind them, because the fans are really a part of it. They're a part of the whole experience.
I think it will, and I think it does a great job for people who weren't around during the initial launch of it to see, man, that was something special. That was something cool. And I think that your doc does a great job of telling that tale. So, you know, congrats to you on that one. If people want to annoy you on the internet, where can they find you to do that?
Well, I'm easy to find. You can look at my personal social media at that Chris Gore, but you can also on Instagram and Twitter, but also you can go to Attack of the Doc. That's doc.com. All the links are there. You can follow Attack of the Doc on social media for how to like rent it or buy it on video on demand. And the Blu-ray will be out in July with tons of secret stuff on it. I can't wait for people to check it out.
I would like a copy of that. That sounds like a good time.
Cool.
And thank you so much for joining me today, Chris Gore. We appreciate having you. Is there anything else you want to say before I let you go?
No, just thank you, William, for being a film snob. You're my kind of person.
Hey, we're here for you. Expect a follow from us on the Twitters before we, in the next day or so. We'll be there with you, talking film. Love it. Have a great rest of your day, man.
I appreciate it.